Hi, everybody. Beth here from Access Paranormal Live from London, PIVC 2020. I have Shannon Bradley-Byers with me for the next hour, all about paranormal genealogy. Now, a little bit about this fantastic woman. Being obsessed with paranormal and genealogy, Shannon found that there was a lot of false information surrounding famous haunted locations. And so she made it a mission to find the facts and expose the lies. Finding the real story behind haunted places was not easy. Scouring libraries, newspaper archives, she found out the truth, and she has since authored 2 books, one of them known as Paranormal Folklore Nevermore. And in this session, she shares what she's found with research she's conducted and how she's found it. Welcome, Shannon.
I see you took out all the stuff about the kilt.
Oh, I love that. Was I mean, I know. I would. Yeah, we can talk about researching kilts if you like.
Oh, can we? That would be so much more fun. Hello, everybody.
So of course your book, Paranormal Folklore Nevermore. It's again a fantastic book. I'll just bring it up here so everyone can have a bit of a sticky beak at it themselves. It's yeah, obviously there are particular chapters in this particular book that you mention, you know, with locations. So there's, of course, Waverly Hills is in there, the information about that. There's obviously Bobby Mackey's. And, you know, I was just thinking, where do you start off a little bit about, say, for instance, with Bobby Mackey's? You know, obviously there's the story about Pearl Bryan. You know, if you're able to elaborate what you found in your research regarding that particular story and how true it actually is.
I can. Before we start, though, I would like to just say real quick, number one, thanks for doing this for the fundraising for the COVID efforts. And then 2, Kenny Biddle, who's going to be speaking in a little while. And I just found out yesterday that we lost a friend that was instrumental in the research that we did on the Conjuring House. So I'd like to dedicate this talk to Kent Spotswood because this book would not have been what it is without him.
Wonderful.
So, sad fact over. And for everybody who knows him, Nigel's here to help to talk. So if anybody's got questions for Nigel, he's here. Bobby Mackey's. That's kind of the case that got me started on paranormal genealogy. I remember watching Ghost Adventures with the adventure that they did on investigating Bobby Mackey's. And I started watching it, and they mentioned Pearl Bryan, and I've been fascinated with true crime since I was 8 years old. And Pearl Bryan and Lizzie Borden were the first 2 cases I ever actually did my own research on. So I knew a lot about the Pearl Bryan murders that happened in 1896. So when they started this episode and they started saying all this stuff about her that I knew for a fact was not true, that kind of guided me on to, okay, how many other locations are they putting on these TV shows where they're not telling the truth about the actual events that happened at these places? With Bobby Mackey's, you know, one of the first things that they tell you is that it used to be a slaughterhouse. Bobby Mackey's was never, ever a slaughterhouse. When Pearl Bryan was actually murdered, there was an active whiskey distillery on that property. When the whiskey distillery was torn down, that's when the speakeasies and things came in after that. There was never, ever a slaughterhouse there. The well to hell that they talk about that is so famous when you go to investigate, and, you know, it's supposed to be really spooky, horrible things to you, you know, has actually been proven to be one of the 3 viaducts that were built specifically for the distillery. They have the distillery into an agreement with the railroad company, which is right, you know, anybody who's been to Bobby's knows that the railroad tracks are right there near it. And they came to an agreement with the railroad company to build those viaducts, one to keep the tracks from flooding when the river would raise. And what they would do is pump in the water from the river for the distilling process for the whiskey that they made. So the well to hell is actually something that was built in the 1800s to go under the tracks to the river.
Okay. interesting. I've been to the location, and it's in a very distinct condition at the moment. It's not being loved the way it should have been, let's just say.
No,
it's interesting.
it hasn't. And it's, I don't deal a whole lot with the history after Pearl Bryan's murder. When in the book, what I do is I give you the background, but I focus more on Pearl because, my thing is she is the one that's being maligned in these episodes because they're saying they cut off her head and threw it down the hill, and they cut off her head because of they were in a satanic cult. And, none of that is true. Absolutely none of it. So the chapter in the book on her actually deals more with her and the early history of the actual property that Bobby Mackey's is on, not the current state of Bobby Mackey's.
Interesting. Why do you think, I mean, I kind of know the answer, but I'm going to say it anyway. Why do you think people really twist the truth? Or do you think it's just literally innocent Chinese whispers? Or why do you think things change?
Well, basically what I have found in the research that I do, and you have to understand when I research, I mean, this is not, Googling. This is not Wikipedia. This is actually going and pulling old newspapers, microfilm, accounts of the day. I've got blueprints of the distillery that was there. I go in and actually matched old time maps with current day maps to see what was where when. There was a slaughterhouse near there, but it was like 50 yards from where Bobby Mackey's is now. And the murder of Pearl itself was such a morbid thing because they did cut her head off. Anybody who gets my book is going to see a crime scene photo of one of the policemen with her body with no head. But people like to make stuff up to make money. And from my research, what I've been able to tell is that somewhere in the early 2000s, there was somebody that wrote a book. And I believe this was about the time that Carl started making an appearance at Bobby Mackey's. I think that man had his own demons. I don't think it had anything to do with Bobby Mackey. Whether he was mentally ill, whether he was actually possessed by something, that's not for me to say. I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose him. But I think he brought his problems to that place. And, may in some ways, if you believe in the poltergeist theory that you're manifesting, your own poltergeist through your own energy, it may have been something like that. But the first person who wrote the book on the place, like I say, was around 2005, and they started all these stories that completely contradict all the newspaper accounts of the day. There weren't, I even went so far as to, research satanic cults in the 1890s. And, there were none in Wilder, Kentucky at that time. That place was known for horrible lynchings that took place. There was a horrible train wreck that took place. A lot of people died in that. So it's not like I'm saying the area does not have a reason to be haunted. There's a lot of death associated in and around that property. But it's not because of Pearl Bryan. Pearl wasn't even killed there. She was killed across town where, if I remember right, it's where the local YMCA is now. The closest she got to actually being there was the people that had murdered her had driven a buggy from Cincinnati over the river to Kentucky, and the buggy driver actually stopped at the whiskey distillery because he was freaked out and he didn't want to take him any further. So he pulled over at the whiskey distillery, and that's when he got a gun pulled on him and, told him he had to continue on or he was going to end up dead. So these are the kinds of things I go through in that chapter in the book and explain the chronology, the series of events. Those words come out. From the time that they took her from Cincinnati to the time and through when they found her body.
That's it. Yeah, it's funny. Julie Kenny has mentioned here that it shows why research into backstory is so important and not just going off stories.
It absolutely does. Because like I've told Beth, when we've talked before, I'm not one of those people that believes in going to a place and investigating cold. I believe that if you're going to actually do relevant EVP sessions, you need to ask questions that are relevant to whoever may have been there. You go to Bobby Mackey's and try to talk to Pearl Bryant, you're not going to get anything. She wasn't there.
Yeah. I've done it. That was I've done it. I'll put my hand up and say, yeah, I did that. Because again, I went through what you hear about folklore stories, and it's not the truth.
Well, and again, that's why I say, people will say, oh, I did my research. And I'm like, okay, you read Wikipedia. You read whatever Bobby Mackey's got up on their website. You've read, you have not actually taken the time to go back and look at 1896 documents, to see. I mean, it was a huge news story. It was in every paper in the United States and over where you are. It was a huge story. Because they cut her head off and they could, how they identified her body?
No.
Her shoes. Back then, she was a really rich girl. Her daddy had a lot of money, and she actually had an extra toe, and she had to have shoes specially made. And there were serial numbers in your shoes back then. So when they couldn't find her head, because fingerprinting was not a thing back then. They couldn't run fingerprints. So they actually took the serial number that was in her shoes and traced it back to the store that sold them to her when she bought them.
Wow.
And that's something, you don't
ever that's intense.
Like that.
So say, for instance, there's a haunted. So, say for instance, somebody wants to look at a particular location. They want to investigate the history behind it. What are your best tips to somebody who wants to find the truth and not just open up Wikipedia or Google?
Forget that. Forget the internet. I learned how to investigate or research the old school way. You go to archives. You go to libraries. You learn how to work a microfilm machine. You actually, find documents from that time. When I tell people, okay, they've got a certain house in a town they're going to investigate, first thing you need to do is go to that town and go to the library and start reading things from the time period that they think that the haunting may have started. If you've got a house that was built in 1980, you're going to be doing different research from a house that was built in 1842 or any time in between. You go to the courthouse, you look at the land records, you see what was there before that house was built. You go through the newspapers, you find out, were there any epidemics that went through? Were there any hurricanes? Were there any plane crashes, train crashes, yellow fever, anything that might have caused a large loss of life in that area at any time? So, you can start to get a picture of that town's history, and then you can narrow down to the actual property. A lot of times, when you go look up the deeds for these properties, you get a list of who has lived there. And you can start to look into the personal histories of those people. Back when I used to still do residential investigations, everybody that we did, when we were done with the investigation, they got a little booklet that I had put together that was the genealogies of all the people that had lived in that house. Who lived there, who died there, who got married there, where they were buried. If they were in a war, what happened to them when they were in the war, if I could find the service records. That's something that we always gave them to kind of help them better understand the history of whatever haunting they may be dealing with.
Our mate Kenny, hey! On average, how long does it take to research one location?
Months to years. I mean, it's not something that can be done in a day. It's not something that can be done in a week. And a lot of times it's going to depend on where the location is. Again, when we used to do residential, our thing is we would go anywhere within a 4-hour driving radius of Atlanta, which could hit Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee. Never included Florida. We're too far away from that. So, I would make weekend trips to go to the libraries and the archives when they were open to do this stuff. So they're Pearl Bryan, if you want to take her for an example, 30 years of research.
Wow. Yeah. Finding that information, it's a passion, and that's what people often say. Oh, you're interested in the paranormal, you have to have a passion about it. But it's, again, to spend 30 years researching and getting to the bottom of truth with regards to a story so well known as that. I mean, that takes
if you want to expand on Kenny's question, one of the chapters in the books is on the Myrtles, which is, one of my favorite locations because none of what they tell you is true. Again, just like Bobby Mackey's. That one was the most heartbreaking for me in the research that I did, because I actually spent months going through all the slave trade records for Louisiana to prove that Chloe did not exist. And that was, sitting and going through, all those records of people that were considered property, and how they were talked about and their prices and what they were worth. I tried for months doing that research, but I did it so that I could come back and say, all you people that are talking about Chloe are full of crap. She didn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a beautiful building. And that, again, that's another building I've had the privilege of going in and staying in and having a very interesting experience about sleep deprivation in there. I've been up for 36 hours. It's a long story. And
again, I'm not saying the place isn't haunted. I'm just saying that the whole Chloe story and the story about the man that was murdered on the porch, all the stuff that you hear about on the TV shows to make it exciting is either completely made up or has been twisted, to make you think that you're going to have some kind of experience when you go investigate there. And it's also, they can make money. I talked to people at the City Hall when I was in St. Francisville, when I was doing that research, and, their whole thing when I was talking about this was, this is, huge tourist money for us. And I'm sitting there thinking, you're trading tourist money for either degrading, the people that built that great plantation and his actual personal history, which I do go into in the book as well. Because he had an interesting life before, during, and after when he lived there. And your thing is, okay, we can make money offline.
Yeah. Kenny also said, to clarify, my question was to demonstrate the difference between serious research and weekend warrior ghost hunters. Makes a point. Awesome. Another comment from him as well. He said here, I feel that we can get so deep into research, we feel connected to the historical figures we're learning about. Do you find that's ever happened to you? Like, obviously with Myrtles, it was difficult.
Well, I get connected, yes, because, the details that I get into on these people, for the Myrtles, for example, one of the things was that Chloe supposedly poisoned these people for one of two reasons, depending on which story you go by, and killed a woman, either a woman and her 2 kids, a pregnant woman and her 1 child, again, depending on who's telling the story. And, you find out that this poor man was devastated because he lost his family, all but 1 child, to yellow fever. And it's documented in the court documents that they died of yellow fever. And, you can't, again, going back to reading the slave trade records, you do get attached to what you're doing. Pearl, for me, was such a personal one because, like I say, she'd been with me since I was 8 years old. And I don't mind saying I'm 51. So that's a very long time that Pearl has been in my life. And, I feel very connected to the fact that she was being maligned. Same with Bathsheba Sherman and the Conjuring House. I know Kenny's going to pop up and say something because Kenny and I, both have an obsession with that place. You've got all these people that are being talked badly about, lied about. They're not here to defend themselves anymore. So when you do find out their true stories, you can't help but have it ingrained in your life.
Yeah, exactly. He's on fire today. Kenny again. Of the TV shows Shannon has watched, how often do you think they get the history correct versus how often they embellish it to make it more exciting?
I would say 90% of it is embellished. There are a few places where they do get the history right. The Villisca Axe Murder House, the history there, I can't question. When I was looking at places to have in my book, that was one of the ones I looked at, because the murders there were so horrific. I couldn't find any fault with that one. But there are very, very few. I've got another list for book 2, and then I've got a list in the back of this book, that I'm not going to do because other people have done it. It's very rare to find a place that is, number one, making money on people coming to investigate, and number 2, featured on TV shows where you're getting the real history. And I think I've only seen maybe one TV show on Villisca. I could be wrong, but I think there's only been one. But the rest of them, Waverly Hills. You got any idea how much they charge to go investigate that place for a weekend?
Oh, I do.
It's over $1,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
The history that they give you, again, this is one I cover extensively in the book, from its pre-inception, to when it closed in 1960. Again, you're paying all this money, and I understand that people are trying to upkeep the place. It's a huge place. It needs a lot of work, but give the right history to the people that are coming, because that's one that, me and a friend of mine, Pam, she actually started the project, but we went through and got the death certificates for every single person who died at Waverly to prove that it wasn't 60,000 people.
Yeah.
By the time we were done, we're down to, with a margin of error, because you have to consider how death certificates were done between 1910 and 1960. You were always supposed to put the location where the person died. So it should have Waverly Hills on it. But given a margin of error, we're saying between 5,500 and 6,000 people over a 50-year length of time died there. Now, that's still a hell of a lot of people. There's still a lot of reasons for that place to be haunted. But there's no reason, for the inflated numbers that keep getting thrown out. Now, I have heard in the last couple of years since my book came out, the numbers are coming down when they're telling people how many people died there. So, that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, was to get the truth out there. 5,000 people dead of tuberculosis is not a good thing, but when you look at how bad the tuberculosis outbreak was, which I do go into in the book, that's not a good thing. But they make Waverly Hills to be out a place of horror when it was actually a cutting edge sanatorium for people that were suffering with a horrible disease, but they had a great cure rate. And because their cure rate was so good, they actually had to pass a law in Louisville, because people from all over the world were trying to get in there to get cured, that you had to be a resident of there for a year before you could get into the sanatorium.
Wow. Yeah, it's an amazing location. And I think even when I went there a couple of years ago, they'd said something on the lines of, people say like 80,000 deaths. It's not as much as that. So, and yeah, because originally that was what's widely known. I mean, as you say, if you Google it on the internet, you'll get 10 different answers. No one gives the actual sort of truth of how many would have passed. But yeah, it's it was actually really.
And you know, when Pam and I were going through these death certificates, you know, that goes back to getting to know these people. You know, there were newspaper articles on the people that were in there, and when you sit and read that many death certificates, you know, the ages of the people that were there, you know, the amount of children that were there, it's just, it gets devastating, and you can get kind of depressed because, okay, 5,000 death certificates is a lot of people.
Yeah, it's just, yeah. And like you said, I remember even when I was doing the tour before actually, you know, doing our investigation that night, they even mentioned that, you know, again, it's meant to look like or be known as a place of horror, and, you know, and just, you know, not a pleasant place to be. But like you said, it was first rate, and everyone was treated really well. And I think that's the reason why energy stays there, is because people's last moments there were good. I mean, the body chute down the bottom was hidden. They didn't want to upset people when people did actually die, you know, by seeing people dead being taken out.
A good example, you know, with the picture that you're showing, the day that the current building opened, the first thing they did was move the children in on the 5th floor. Now, anybody who has been listening to the history of Waverly, you know, for the last 10, 15 years, you know, what's the thing you always hear? All the psychos were on the 5th floor.
Yeah.
Waverly Hills took no psychiatric patients that had tuberculosis. All the tuberculosis patients in Kentucky went to the state hospital. The 5th floor was always for the kids.
Okay. I remember them saying that when I was doing that tour, is like those that had mental illness were kept on the top floor because they were vulnerable as well as the children. But yeah, there you go.
Nope.
Robert has got a question
here. Robert.
For you. What's your opinion of Franklin Castle in Cleveland, Ohio?
I don't have one. You know, that's on my list to do. I don't know anything about that one.
Oh, interesting. Make a note. Awesome. Yeah, so and of course, I mean, you briefly mentioned the Conjuring house. I would love to know your thoughts more on that particular interesting story.
Do you really?
Yeah, we're not here for a haircut or a pizza, so we might as well. But that would be a really good deal.
All right. The Conjuring house. Everything you've read about it is crap. Kenny, jump in here. I have research. Oh God, the research I've done on this place. We all know the Conjuring house because of the movies. I'm sure a lot of your people have read the books, the trilogy series that has been written about the supposed events that happened at that house. That included the Warrens back in the 70s. This is one of those that the story that is told by the people that lived in the house gets so convoluted and has changed so much in the last, well, since they lived there. You can't keep up with what they even believe anymore. And it's probably the most confusing chapter in my book because I try to succinctly tell you what that family believes and what they're putting out there. And then I will go into how all of it is wrong. You know, Bathsheba, you know, in the movie is portrayed as a witch. The most horrible of women who killed the baby and, you know, did all these horrible things. And this poor Baptist woman who's buried in consecrated ground, who never killed a child in her life, she did lose some of her own children. She only had one that lived to adulthood. There's absolutely nothing in the court records of Burrillville that say anything about this. And you know good and well that the gossip columns in the newspapers, or if there had been, you know, any kind of court hearings or anything like that, it would be in the books. And fortunately, that part of Rhode Island is It's not like down here in the South where all our courthouses burned between 1860 and 1880 and all those records, before are gone. They've got everything. And the gentleman that I mentioned previously, Kent, who just passed away, was instrumental because he had some ins with some people that could look at court documents that the public couldn't. And, his research into that, as well as what Kenny has done and what I have done and what a friend of ours, Jamie Rubio, has done, we've proved 100% that most of the facts that are in that first book in that trilogy are wrong, made up, lies. All the deaths that are reported there, both Kenny and I have been through what's called the Black Book, which is a lot of places have the Black Book, and it's weird, deaths, murders, suicides, things like that happen in communities. And I see Kenny saying he wants to jump in. You can do your talk when you do yours. So, we've gone through and we've listed, okay, these people that are listed in the book and or the movie as dying on that property, this is where they actually died, and this is how they actually died, and they were nowhere near that house. And now, Kenny's got a copy of the book. The people that own it now, poor Norma, when she owned that house, when those books came out, her life was ruined because people would not stay away from that property. And that's one of the reasons that I included it in the book, because Norma's life was hell for all those years. And now the people that have bought it are trying to cash in on all the books that have been written and all the TV shows that have been done. And now there's stuff being filmed there. And, you can sit there and watch these shows and knowing what I know and Kenny knowing what he knows, what's coming out of their mouths is 100% bullcrap because we've proven it. No, this did not happen there. What they're talking about actually happened somewhere else. There's supposedly a famous murder case of a girl that was supposedly killed in that house. She was actually killed across the state line. And anybody who researches the actual newspaper articles of that murder will see that she died in Massachusetts, not Rhode Island. She was not murdered in that house.
Crazy. There's another question. Great minds think alike. Another one. What are your thoughts on the Warrens and the way they investigated locations since they were very popular in the United States?
If the Warrens said it, don't believe it. I don't care if it was locations in the United States or supposedly over in the UK. If it came out of their mouth, it was a lie. And it's, I'm not the only one that says that. Look at Amityville. I didn't even bother to put Amityville in my book because, it's been debunked. Newspaper articles about deals that the owner of that house signed to make it look haunted. Things that I know personally in research that I found about, is it the Eddingfield over there in the UK, when they were supposedly involved in the Conjuring 2 movie. They were there in that house less than a day. They had nothing to do with that case. So if you come to me and say, but the Warren said, I'm going to be like, talk to the hand. Talk to the hand. I don't want to hear it. And Nigel's going to give you a dirty look.
No, I don't want to do a look from Nigel, poor thing, getting kept in quarantine. Yeah, it's definitely a lot of misinformation, and it's like you said, unless you dig down and actually look for the actual facts and the truth, it's very easy. I mean, the Warrens have a very well-known reputation, probably more for other things than what they would like to have been known. But I love it.
Well, they're both dead now, so.
Yes. How hard is it to come out with these truths, and what other reactions from people, paranormal groups and tour groups? That's a great question.
It is not hard for me at all because, I consider it a mission. Again, my thing is twofold. If you're going to investigate a place, you need to be able to do it properly and quit talking about these people and the things that they didn't do. Another really good example, and this is one of my favorite places too, is Old Charleston Jail and Lavinia Fisher. I want to back up a second to Julie's question. I have been uninvited from more paranormal conventions and podcasts than I have been invited to when they found out what I was actually going to talk about. Because they just see, oh, you've done research on these haunted places. And I'm like, yeah, but you need to know before you have me at this place on your show, whatever, this is what I'm actually going to say. And they're like, well, we can't do that. It's too controversial. So I hope that answers your question, Julie. Old Charleston Jail is another big one because, everybody talks about how Lavinia Fisher, was this awful murderess and she was America's first serial killer. And, she murdered these people and she was hung and she had this famous phrase that she said. And, one of those things is true. She actually did stand there on the gallows and say, if you've got a message for the devil, let me know, because I'll give it to him. But what people don't tell you is that within an hour, she also recanted that, because she didn't say it and then she was hung. This was an all day long process for hangings back in the 1820s. She never actually murdered anybody. She was convicted of highway robbery, which was a hanging offense back at that time. She and her husband ran an inn. She was not the best woman, she had a temper. She liked to beat up people. She's no different than a lot of women now. But killing anybody, no. America's first serial killer, no. America's first woman hung, no. That happened in 1642, and there were 35 people in between that person and her. So all these stories that you get when you go to tour or go to pay to investigate this place, are just wrong. And you get people talking about what an evil spirit Lavinia is and blah, blah, blah. And okay, if Lavinia's spirit is there, I'd be pissed off too, because you're standing there talking to me telling me that I murdered over 100 people when I never even murdered one. Right? They say, she was hung in her wedding dress. Nope. All her possessions were burned as soon as she was jailed. So tell me where her wedding dress came from. So you're going to have to read my book to find out why.
Yeah.
But these are the kind of details you get, and there is also, some stuff that has come up that may or may not, because I have not been able to 100% find documentation on this, that Lavinia was actually a mulatto. She was half black, half white, and had been a slave that her husband had fallen in love with, and they had moved to Charleston and started running the inn, because one of her things that she proclaimed she was in jail for a year. And one of the things that she always said was, I'm a white woman. They won't hang a white woman. And, somebody else actually did some research that leans towards the fact that one of the reasons that she said that was because she was actually a former slave.
Wow. That's intense.
See, all the interesting things you get to find out, because Pearl Bryan, this is one, I say it's one of my favorite things I found out, even though it's really, really sad. Her and her siblings, there are several of them that died really weird. And one of her poor sisters, you know what a folding bed is? A Murphy bed?
I've heard of a folding bed, but not a Murphy bed.
Okay. A Murphy bed is one of those that actually goes up into a wall or a cabinet, and when you want to sleep, you pull it out. Yeah. Her sister went to get in the bed, and the bed folded up and killed her. So she died in a folding bed. Pearl got her head cut off. She had another one that had brain cancer. That poor family was cursed.
Wow. We've got another great question here. If you could transfer one haunted English location to the US to investigate as often as you like, what would you choose?
Oh, an English one? I can tell you a Scottish one. English. Oh, Beth, help me out here. What's the name of that house that used to be a old jail?
A Borley Rectory? No,
No. Bradley Rectory burned down. It's not even there anymore.
Yeah, I know. We can hope.
Penny Griffith Morgan talks about it.
I can see it in my mind. I know exactly which one you're talking about too.
Yes, it's crap. Yeah, that one.
And if anyone does actually,
Richard E. Estep wrote a book about it, and I've got it around here somewhere, but I'd have to look for it. Somebody Google real quick and
yeah, a prize goes to the person who can. Okay,
I send a whole PDF version of Paranormal Folklore to the person that can name that place I'm talking about.
Oh, see, I mentioned Borley, but it's not Borley. It's
But Borley's gone. It's been gone forever. There's no way you can investigate there.
Yeah.
If I could come to the one in Scotland, and this is what I always tell people: if I could investigate anywhere, it would be Culloden Battlefield.
Definitely. And he's got some good ones here.
The Cage, but yeah, doesn't it go by another name?
Little Dean Jail? No, I don't think it's that. Oh, wonderful. Oh, East Drive? No, it wasn't East Drive. Oh, everyone's going nuts. But in the meantime, Penny's got another great question here.
Somebody Google Richard Estep's books.
Yeah, that's a great start, actually. What are your top 3 tips for researching historical claims, and what are your top 3 don't do's when it comes to the same research?
Okay, I'm going to do the don't do's first. Don't read Wikipedia. Don't read the website for the location. And don't listen to anybody who's actually been there to investigate. Those are my don'ts. My do's are, like I said before, research the town first, find out what happened there, find out what didn't happen there. Because if you've got a claim of a murder in a town, then it's going to have been in the newspaper. Newspapers are no different today, yesterday, or way back then than they are now. So if something happened, you're going to find out about it. And you're going to find about other weird things. When I was doing the research for the Conjuring House, one of the most interesting things I found was the scare that they had that went on for people that had died of tuberculosis that they thought were coming back as vampires. So I've got a whole section in that chapter about that. But yeah, I mean, don't listen to other people. What they tell you, if you want to make a note, I go about debunking, and disproving before I go about the proving. Because if I can, in 10 minutes, find a newspaper article or not find a newspaper article that talks about this or doesn't talk about it, that's going to tell me which way I need to go, right or left. If I find that something like that actually happened, then it can take me in 12 other directions because I get distracted really easily. And, I like facts, and the more facts I can throw in, the better. Does that help? Is that good, Kenny?
That's awesome. That's some great information there. People are Witches Prison. That was another one as well as a suggestion. I'm not sure if it was that as someone's mentioned again the cage. We'll get there in the end. We'll find. I can see it in my mind.
I'm gonna have to Google myself. Where's my phone?
I think so. Yeah, why not?
Beth, Google Richard's books.
Richard's books. So Richard.
Hold on Amazon. I wish Penny was here. She could tell us right now.
In Search of the Paranormal. Where is it?
It's not the Monk House, because he wrote one on the Monk House too.
Yeah, he's been busy. Lots of books. In the meantime. Oh, awesome. All right. In the meantime, what's the most impressive investigation you've been on and may have shook you up?
Oh, I can answer this one. Part of the reason that I started investigating was to be able to get into historical locations. I really wasn't all that interested in residential, but because people keep burning down historical locations or going in and doing stuff that gets them banned, I wanted a really good reputation on confidentiality, if need be, thorough research, that kind of thing. So we got invited to investigate what is now a state park down in South Georgia. And a lot of people died in this area due to a yellow fever outbreak. There was also an Indian massacre there in the early 1800s. And in the particular cabin that we had been asked to investigate, they were saying that white women were getting attacked, either held down in the bed, strangled in the kitchen, these kind of things. And the events were so real to these people that they were actually reporting it to the Department of Natural Resources, which runs our state parks here in Georgia. So they invited us to come down and do the research or do an investigation. And they locked my husband out of the cabin. But the total best thing that happened was we had set up a video camera in the room we were going to sleep in. And, we had tested this camera a whole bunch of times before. Every time we get a camera, we set it up in our own bedroom and tape us sleeping and see all the evil things the cats do, while we were asleep. But so we know how this camera works. We knew what to do with it, set it up in the corner, went to bed. I wake up like it's 6:14 in the morning. And I wake up because something had grabbed my foot. And so I kind of laid there and I'm like, well, maybe Dave kicked me. And like, I looked over and Dave's feet were really far away from mine, weren't anywhere near mine. And while I'm sitting there trying to figure out what happened, the comforter is ripped off the end of the bed.
Ooh. Oh dear. It's the paranormal. She's gone. She'll be back in a second, no doubt. There's some great questions, guys. Honestly, it's really fascinating hearing from Shannon about the actual facts of these particular cases. She does have, again, she's got her book. I'll bring up the image of it as well. So if you want to actually go and check it out, she's got a fantastic, as you said, like she calls a spade, and that's what I find is probably most refreshing to gravitate towards those kinds of people. And I think it's really important as investigators to find out your demons. Could be demons. She might be, she'll be back in a little bit. I'll just keep an eye on my phone. But yeah, it's been, here we go. Nope, yeah, she'll be back. She's probably just knocked something. Demons, technical difficulties, please stand by. Oh, I love it. But yeah, so that's her book, Paranormal Folklore Nevermore. And again, fantastic information in there. I obviously have the privilege of being able to have an online version of it, so that's something I want to be able to read over the next week or two as well. But again, it's going to be just making sure. There we go. Oh, there's my lovely face. So I hope everyone's enjoying the session for today for PIVC 2020. Again, we're always at the whim of the internet gods, and I knew that something was going to happen. We were having it too good for too long. Oh, and you've got a copy of the book as well. Yes, it's again, the fact finding. It's really, really important. And here we go. She's back in now.
My computer. I'm so sorry. My computer completely died. Now I'm on my phone. So.
Oh wow! That was unfortunately thought it was demons. And it was demons. What can I say?
Okay, so to pick up where I left off, the comforter was ripped completely off the bed from the end of the bed, right? And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, nothing like that has ever happened to me before. So I'm like, we've got the video camera running. This is going to be great. We actually got something on camera. Remember I said this happened at 6:14?
Yeah.
The camera cut off at 6:10.
Oh.
So it's not on camera. I'm the only one who saw it. But it was my favorite. That was absolutely that whole weekend we had things like that happening. And it's the most active place we've ever been to.
Wow. Intense.
I'm sorry about that, guys. My computer said battery low and then it died.
Trust me, and you know what? If we don't have one technical glitch with each session, that means it's not real. It's not real. Awesome. Now, I was going to ask you a little bit more about Cold Mountain. Your thoughts on that? So, are you able to write found out with that?
Cold Mountain. Anybody who's familiar with the book or the movie, was actually written by my cousin back in the 90s. And it's a fictionalized account of something that happened, in the 1800s. When I was in middle school, which would be 8th grade over here, we were told to do a project, and this is what got me started in genealogy. And I'm fixing to switch back over to the computer so this doesn't look so bad. Okay. Am I there?
Yeah.
You got me? All right.
Woo.
Okay.
Yeah, I gotcha.
This is what got me started in the actual family history research. We were told to write a paper on a family story that had been handed down through the family. Mm-hmm. And the story of Inman, who is the character that Jude Law played in the movie, is the one that I picked to do. And it's the one where my mother took me to the archives, the libraries and stuff, because there were so many different versions of the family story. We didn't know what was true. So, I eventually ended up finding out what happened. And again, the book is okay. Again, my cousin wrote it. It's not one of my favorites. I, don't like the story that much. The movie, the cinematography was wonderful, even though they filmed it over in Romania instead of North Carolina. But the story itself, it was important to me to get out there because, I don't want to give any spoilers if you haven't seen the movie. If you get my book, I recommend you see the movie before you read the chapter because it's a bonus chapter in the book. The real story is so much more interesting. And it's the same, that's a common theme throughout everything. Once you find out the real history, it's so much more interesting than the stuff people are making up. You can tell people that 5,000 people died at Waverly Hills. You don't have to tell them that it was 60,000. That's still a lot of people dead. But the Cold Mountain one, that one's the one that's always going to be in my heart because that's what got me started on the genealogy process.
You even physically went out looking, like in the actual area.
Yeah, I've actually done GPR, ground penetrating radar, on the area where he's buried. He does not have a tombstone, thankfully, that people can go desecrate now because of the movie. But yeah, that's me out there doing the GPR to prove that he was actually buried in a grave with somebody else. And that's what I was trying to prove. And I did, that there were two bodies in that grave.
Intense.
It was back when I had red hair.
Oh yeah, you did. When I was reading through the book, I was like, "Is that you?"
Yeah, that was my red-headed days.
We got another great question. Have you ever found interesting stories at haunted places in NC?
North Carolina is my home away from home. I haven't done a ton of research in quote unquote haunted places. There are places in North Carolina that I love to go. Judaculla Rock which is this big giant rock that supposedly a giant put his handprint on, and things like that. Going to Cherokee and, looking at things there. I stay in Western North Carolina. I've been to bed and breakfasts where, Dave and I have had experience, again, while we're sleeping. We didn't have cameras this time, of people that, had died in what the home formerly was, places that were funeral homes or whatever before, preachers' homes. We find something everywhere we go. With me, it doesn't take much. I can dig something up. But places in particular that are extremely interesting, no. I mean, they're all interesting. Any death to me is interesting. And the more weird, the better. But there's nowhere in particular in North Carolina because I don't seek it out. North Carolina is where I go to decompress, and get away from all of this. So no.
Yeah, as much as we love what we do, we also need a break. We definitely need a break.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on the exorcism and the boy? I know that chapter's also in your book as well.
It's all a load of crap. That's always going to be my stock answer, because if it wasn't a load of crap, it wouldn't be in the book. Again, I've done the research to prove or disprove things that other people have put in their documentaries that they have done. I've even gone so far as to, I interviewed a psychologist about the boy himself and talked about a lot of his behavioral issues that were going on. And, in this day and age, a lot of the things that he exhibited, and you've got to keep in mind, I've read this diary backwards and forwards a million times. And one thing you've got to keep in mind is most of this stuff was not witnessed. The people would come into the room and find so-and-so, or, after they left the room, they would hear so-and-so. And the psychiatrist that I talked to said, today, that boy, who is actually still alive, unless he's died in the last couple of months, would be diagnosed somewhere on the Asperger's or ADHD, somewhere on that spectrum because of the things that he did. And a lot of that is based on his behavior and his psychological makeup before he decided to try to tell people he was possessed or make people think he was possessed.
Intense. Robert said, didn't that boy later in life work for NASA and then discount the entire thing?
No, he did go to work for NASA, and he's actually got a patent in his name, but he has never, ever spoken to anybody about it.
Got another question from our mate. Have you ever been confronted by someone whose research you've debunked? If so, how did that go?
Yes, I have, and I was told by the person who wrote the Conjuring books what a horrible person I am.
Wow. How did you go about hearing that from them?
I have it in a Facebook message. I still have it. It goes on and on and on and on. And Kenny will know it uses way more words than needed to be used. I did not bother responding to it because Kenny, at the time, you had some stuff in the works and I didn't want to mess that up. So I never responded to it. The Exorcist stuff, I have gone over with one of the brothers that did a documentary on that, and he and I have made our piece on that. He's coming at it from an entertainment perspective. I'm coming at it from a historical. But yes, we did have a big sit down after Scarefest 3 years ago and have a very long discussion and have since become friends, and we agreed to disagree.
That's good. See, there is hope.
Because he's got a good heart. He's not a bad guy. He's all about the entertainment factor, which I can't deal with.
Yeah, that's it. Because at the moment we're starting to see, of course, that entertainment seems to be the one thing that one of the more common reasons why facts do get twisted. Yep. Is for entertainment.
And that's one of, going back to Cold Mountain, that's one of the reasons I put that one in the book as a bonus, you know, number one, because it was so personal, but number two, so people could know the real story, you know, from what my cousin didn't write. You know, if my cousin can't even write what really happened, who can, you know? So I was like, okay, here's what my cousin said, you know, and don't get me wrong. When I watched the movie from a I don't know a thing perspective, I do enjoy it. And it's what made me fall in love with Jude Law, because I didn't like him before that. You know, but a good example of that and not giving anything away is the church that they're building in the movie at the beginning. Actually was not built until 1902. It was not built before the Civil War started.
Yeah, wow. Well, we've come to the end of our hour already. It has gone so quickly.
No,
I could talk for so long with you. Pick your brain. But I know, of course, you've got a bit of an offer, I guess you could say, with your books. I don't know if you want to explain a bit about that.
Yeah. One of the things I started doing when everybody started staying home, you know, with the COVID thing is, you know, if you're interested in reading one of the chapters in my book and you've got and I'm going to look because I always forget when I try to say what the chapters are. So forgive me 1 second. Yeah, you've got Lavinia Fisher in Old Charleston Jail, Pearl Bryan, Old Bobby Mackey's, The Exorcist House and Boy, Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Bathsheba Sherman and the Conjuring House, The Myrtles Plantation, and The Real Story of Cold Mountain. If you're interested in reading one of these chapters, send me an email. I think Beth's going to put my email address up, and I will send you a PDF version of that chapter. You know, and you know, if you enjoy that, then maybe you'll buy the book, which, you know, can be found on Amazon in both ebook and hard book.
Fantastic. Great. Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Shannon, for joining us here at PIVC 2020. Really appreciate you giving your time for this particular day, and obviously in honor for those charities working alongside and helping with this horrible crisis of COVID-19. Appreciate your support. I know you've been up since 4 and watching all the different sessions by everyone, so it means a lot. It means an absolute lot, and I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for joining.
Well, and thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me be the token female. That was really cool.
had to get a bit of estrogen in there. I was a little glad I'd been testosterone fester.
Yeah, just a little. And I hope people didn't mind that I didn't do a PowerPoint. I just wanted to sit and talk.
That's fine. I think sitting and talking is a very common thing right now, which I'm not complaining about at all.
Yeah. I mean, I have to do much at the conventions and stuff, and I love the one-on-one better. So thanks to everybody that tuned in, and thank you for the questions, and thank you for watching, Kenny and Robert.
Take care. See you guys in half.